again, and thanks for making time to join us tonight. It does feel weird talking to empty chairs. Just starting first by thanking all of our panelists who have made time during this challenging time to come and engage with us on this important topic that we'll be covering today. I think there's no doubt that the world is going through some really challenging situations. A year ago, this time, none of us, or even beginning of the year, actually anticipated that we would be locked up in our houses, would be operating and managing business in a different manner. But I do recognize that a number of our colleagues on this panel have taken time off to ensure that what actually matters for us in terms of the women in energy and can continue, and we can continue to feed you and provide you hope and also stimulate your minds during this particular time. As a starting point, I would like to thank again Maurice and his family for allowing us the opportunity to continuously utilize the ULP platform to be able to engage. I am actually quite young into this. This initiative was started 4 years ago by Mr. Radabe and his family, particularly him with his passion to be able to transform the energy industry. And as such, I've been part of this journey for 2 years. I do recall back in 2018 when I first came here, and I was speaking to a house full of really enthusiastic, energized individuals, and we're talking about the energy landscape and the challenges that we are facing as an industry, but equally so the opportunities that we're facing going forward. So out of that session and subsequent discussions going into last year's summit during the month of August, which is Women's Month, the concept of think tanks, as well as continuously ensuring that we can invite various players in the industry that has a good understanding of the challenges, but in other industries as well that interacts through the value chain to come and share their views, to help us shape our path, and also to ensure that we can network continuously going forward. And as part of that, I would also want to recognize Ntato Minyuku, who has been very instrumental in challenging us in terms of understanding some of the challenges that women are facing in our industry. We have no doubt that when you look at the university entrance as well as the qualifications, we've got exceptional talent coming out of university, and most of those get absorbed in our industry in various roles. At some stage, we do then hit a hurdle. We've called it a funnel, and the challenge here is what are those challenges that we are facing as an industry? How do we unlock value for us to be able to support individuals, support the female talent that is capable going into the future in an inclusive way, while also respecting diversity and inclusion, and that we can gain a lot out of our male colleagues. So tonight's session is not going into most of those hurdles, is to look forward. In 2018, when I spoke about the opportunities or challenges, depending on how you want to look at it, that our industry is facing. And one of those was the fact that we are really an integral part of providing and stimulating economic activities for the countries and the country where we operate, particularly in South Africa. Yet, we should also be mindful that our customers, our consumers, our communities are also demanding from us not only cheap, affordable, available energy, but also clean energy going forward. And it's a phenomenon that we need to be preparing ourselves to migrate into and ensuring that we are leading, not necessarily just following South Africa as well as part of that journey and a path. And in addition to that, the digital evolution is with us. Most of us have been going through, as all of us actually, have been going through this COVID. We've started adapting and working from home. None of us have ever thought that we could actually adapt at that scale within a short period of time. And when I look at my 11-year-old niece, nephew, and I look at my 13-year-old niece, most of the time they don't talk to me. They're talking to the technology. So the consumer behavior, the customer behavior, and the environment that we work in is becoming more and more sophisticated with digital leading. So in terms of that, I firmly believe that opportunities for women to be quite instrumental, not only from a commercial and a technical perspective, in leading us towards and navigating the opportunities into the future, is quite significant. But equally so, we require different leadership. We usually talk about leadership of empathy, collaboration, adaptive, and curiosity. And I do believe that those are opportunities that we can bring into the world and the environment that we operate within that has been very, very male-dominated in the past. I'm not going to take the thunder from the panel, but the topic for today is really looking into that future and understanding what do we need to do as women to be able to ensure that we are actually poised for success, that we can actually continuously engage in this male-dominated environment and engage with our colleagues as equals, but also be able to open a path for those who come after us. And I'm looking forward to getting a lot of insights from our panels today. And I wish you all the best and enjoy the session. And I'll hand over to Untitled. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. So we've got quite an exciting panel here today to engage on ways that women can reposition themselves as the energy sector shifts. The risks of shifting, so are the opportunities. And so what does this open for women in terms of repositioning themselves for the future? Before we start off today's session, we will have a quick HSSE moment. And just to give you the comfort at home that we are all observing our 1 meter social distance. We have sanitized. The venue has also been sanitized. We've all been temperature checked. And we are observing all the necessary protocols to minimize any risk from a COVID-19 perspective. Another thing to frame as you look at the panel is that you will see women and men on our panel, because we understand that in developing collectives for the empowerment of women, access to information, access to opportunities, access to networks, we do recognize that you need male allies too in the journey for female empowerment. I'd just like to introduce you to everybody who's on the panel, and then we'll kick off the discussions. We'll start off with, we've got Kwezi Tia. He is the head of oil and gas at Standard Bank. We've also got Claire Lowry, who's the senior managing director of FTI Consulting. And then we've got Sean Toure, who's the regional head of talent at Puma Energy. All of them have had an opportunity to prepare some inputs, some introductory remarks and thought-provoking comments on how from their specializations and from their areas of influence and opportunity, they see the opportunities for women to reposition themselves going into the future. So we will have some short inputs, and then we will move to the community online. Feel free to send your comments through on the online platforms. They would be channeled through to the panel. And let's have a lively conversation today. Let's have a lively debate. This is an opportunity for us to really do some thinking and some reframing of women within the energy future. So let's have a good discussion. I'll start off with Kwezi, if you can just give us your sense and framing.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining remotely. But as Tantato says, I hope we do feel connected. I think I'll preface my comments on this subject of women and being fit for the future in energy by, not as an advertorial, but to then say, actually the bank I work for, its group CEO is a thematic champion of the he for she movement of the UN Women. So it's both maybe a passion that may be there as an individual, but also a duty that we have as officers of the bank to promote that initiative. That's quite important. But if you come to the real topic, and I'm going to try and talk about this from the perspective of how you look at money and investment flows being influenced just what's happening globally, and you think about yourself in that context as to how you become fit for the future. So if you look at the recent past, and when I say recent, I said the last 2 months, it's been dominated by headlines that are talking about a major change in global demand, which has had a major influence in the demand for the use of energy. And the International Energy Agency is projecting that this year, compared to last year, where they're projecting in the beginning maybe a 2% growth in energy use, an effective 20% drop in energy investment, or to change it to numbers, $400 billion of less investment expected. And when that happens also, you can imagine that companies go through structural changes. And you are seeing this a lot in the large integrated oil companies. I think BP announced a major staff retrenchment program globally, because it has now to change into a new normal. And that change is affecting the amount of money that may flow to new investments, which sometimes may be a problem also even for now, but also for the future, because some of the necessary investments that need to be made to replenish energy sources are not being made, which some of us may fear may lead to future price shocks, if there's demand that is not being satisfied by supply in the future. So that becomes a major issue. You would have seen in the US, some companies that are in the shale gas space, when the oil prices have dropped, major bankruptcies in companies that were seen as leading edge innovators in that space. And a lot of companies actually having become bankrupt. But the issue of energy transition remains a critical issue. It doesn't go away. And what we've observed out of the data in terms of the investments is that, interesting enough, the power sector globally has been much more robust in terms of investment. It's more the hydrocarbon sector that have seen that change. And what also is happening is that the use of technology, as it has happened in our own personal lives now, has actually become a paramount issue amongst all of the companies at a global level. So when you think about that and you are thinking you are in South Africa, but so surely then things must be very dire. And the answer could be yes and no. And you must think about this when you look at whether you're working in a company, you are doing policy making in the private sector, in the public sector, you are in research and all of that. You must think about that South Africa has got this challenge that it has got legacy large energy investments and has got very few newer investments. And if you think about the fact that the biggest newer investments are in large power stations that are coal-based, in a world in which, if you look at the IEA data, there's been a relative decline in power in thermal coal power investments relative to other sources. And we've seen some renewables, but no large-scale investments. If you look in the hydrocarbon space, we became a net importer in 2008. No major new refinery investments have been seen in this country. And you're also seeing change in needs of society and the rise of electricity prices driving demand for alternative ways of finding energy for heating. And therefore, that then means there's going to become a need for new types of investments and new types of infrastructure. And the companies themselves, who are connected to those global chains, themselves have to change and react to that. As well as the fact that if you go to a country like the US, the demand of energy in the US is the biggest single sponsor of research into the physical sciences. And think about this country and think about the little amount of money that actually goes into research for the new technologies that we need for the energy transition that we want to be a part of. And whether we are going to become just users of other people's technology, or we can then try to create wealth by researching into the new ones. So when you think about investments, we think about those type of things. And I've spoken about infrastructure. And our thesis is that there's going to be lots of potential of significant energy investments needed in the next few years. So if you then have got that context, what does it mean about being a woman energy professional who's fit for that future? Firstly, I think, as Priscilla has said, we are living in a legacy of a male-dominated sector, but with an opportunity for you to influence change. And so the issue about the professional is about how you build your own relevance for that future in the context of the change I've spoken about. And I think the word I want to use is about how you become bold. How you become bold to influence the direction in which things will take place rather than you sit and watch them happen. How you become bold in having the courage to challenge the status quo. Because let's admit it, the environment in which we are working is not easy, it's difficult, and for women it's particularly challenging, and therefore you need to deal with this legacy of male domination. And if you think about the fact that things are changing so fast, how do you build yourself in such a way that you yourself can become renewed? You transition to new type of skills that will be needed in the future that may not necessarily be the ones that you had before. So your ongoing learning and development so that you become relevant as the industry changes. And in the theme of what may be happening today, and I know physically we're not sitting together, but how do you then start to build the networks and you develop them that enrich your objectives, that enrich your ability to grow? And how the technology that we speak about becomes a lever that you use to your own advantage in order to become even more relevant, regardless of the sector, of the sub-sector you are in, private, public, research, academia, and all of that. And I want to leave it there for now and say those are, to me, are the thematic things I want to highlight. And then later on in the conversation, we can talk about the role that actually I think men should be playing in that agenda, in particular men who are in the energy sector.
Thanks, Kwesi. Claire, I think it would get some good insights. You're in the consultancy world, so you see everything everywhere. You see what's behind everybody's closet, in the back of the house, but also in the front of the house. So if you can just share your views with us.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel. Thank you. I'll start again. I was just saying thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel, and good evening to everyone here and everyone else online also. I'm going to share three areas, some perspectives on three areas. One is, what does the future look like in energy? Secondly, how can women be further part of that energy future? And then thirdly, how can we actually empower and help one another in that space? So starting with what's the future of energy, I believe we're living in a world right now where there is profound change all happening at the same time. We've got things like nationalism versus globalization. So people want to reverse globalization. We've got a situation in the world where capitalism is the dominant force of economic systems, is being scrutinized. Do we want more growth and consume more, or do we want sustainability? And it's amazing what's happening about the issues of inequality. Inequality can be economic inequality, gender inequality, race inequality. You can see the protests that are happening now. And of course, we have a global pandemic, or global pandemic. And in countries like Germany, the Scandinavian countries, like Norway and Finland and other countries like New Zealand are handling this extremely well. You may also note that all those countries have female leaders. But I think South Africa is actually handling this very well also. So I think Ramaphosa can become an honorary sister or an honorary woman as being part of that club. So essentially, that's what's happening in the world. And guess what? Energy industry is also at a major inflection point across the world and also here in South Africa. Globally, the most existential and strategic challenge in question on top of everyone's mind is, how do we provide more energy for the world, because people are demanding more energy, but at the same time in a lower carbon way in order to save our planet? It's a very, very fundamental question that's taken place in this industry. Essentially what that means is we must look at our energy mix. What do we produce? How do we produce it? And what do we consume? The forecasts are that hydrocarbons, oil, gas, coal will still play a large role, but the other areas like renewables, like hydrogen and other things are increasing, and particularly gas. So there's several things happening in the world. Emissions are expected to go up. There's an increasing corporate focus on sustainability. There is more policies around climate change, and there's increased activism about it. There's also investor activism as well, in terms of, it's very difficult to get investment for coal. So where do we think South Africa is in all of this situation? Well, first of all, energy is a global business. So you can't look at South Africa different from the global business. But where's South Africa in all of this? So South Africa is currently one of the most energy and carbon intensive countries in the world. Essentially, the energy system in this country is most of our energy system is about taking domestic coal and pushing that into power generation to produce electricity. The second biggest part of that system is also taking imported oil, refining that, and pushing that into transportation fuels. There are other aspects of the economy, which is natural gas, which could be the real bridge from high carbon to lower carbon. But that is currently a system. So we are at a starting point where we're highly carbon intensive. South Africa, for sure, is going to go through its own transition. The timing of that is debatable, but it will go through a decision. It's not an if, it is a win. And with everything else that's happening in the world right now, the things that are happening in South Africa is there's consumer behaviour change. So less air travel, more remote working, consumer demand shifting to online retail, the reversal to a certain extent of globalisation. Also, companies who are working in the sector and in the public sector, there's a recognition that the energy transition is not just a moral objective. There's a realisation that we must diversify our energy system for emissions reasons, but also to drive a diversified revenue streams for our businesses in order to be in touch with the consumer going forward. So all the fundamentals for energy transition are there. In policy, clean fuels, carbon tax, in terms of the economics of energy transition. So the world is changing, and so is South Africa. So what does this mean in terms of opportunities for women? So energy is diversifying in terms of its products. And the people who work in energy will also diversify with that. One of the great things about this industry, and it's one of the reasons I became part of it, is it brings together a mad collection of people like engineers and commercial people and community relations, technicians, and a whole bunch of really different skill sets working together on these things. And that's about to diversify even further. So I think it's a great industry to be part of. And I think to get on in your career in this industry, just be mindful that you could be open to working in the gas sector or the power sector, and the system's going to change. So the connection between these things, as much as you understand each part of it and across the value chain, the better it is for you. And you'll have opportunities to do that in your career. There's also the thinking part, the strategy part, which is, there's big questions now, such as, if you're an oil and gas company, should you now become a utility provider and provide electricity like Shell does in the UK? One of the really interesting parts is the cost or the investment required to transition the infrastructure, whether it be refineries or pipelines or charging stations for electric cars, is going to require a huge and immense part of investment. Now, companies normally fund this from their balance sheets, but now it's going to there's going to have to be partnerships and access to different finance in order to make this happen. Partnerships and relationships are very important. The new energy system cannot be done alone, so the collaboration is unprecedented now between governments, between organisations, between companies and society. So I think a lot of very profound change. The opportunities have diversified, so there's something for you and something in your interests for that. It's not going to be status quo. Change always brings opportunity. So what can you actually do in order to help one another and empower women? First of all, know what the opportunities are. Be part of these networks. Upskill yourself in areas which are going to be important for the future. Your career is never going to be linear. What you do in procurement one day, what you do in the gas business one day, you learn something, and every single time you do a role, there's always some experience that you will find useful later in life. Help and support each other. And that comes from mentorship, connections, leadership. I mean, I was really struck by, you'll know the American jazz singer, Ella Fitzgerald. Amazing woman and a global star. She could not get a big break in her career whatsoever. She was in small jazz clubs, small audiences, absolutely brilliant talent, but just couldn't get the access. It was actually Marilyn Monroe that picked this up, and she announced to the world and to the media that she's going to go to Ella Fitzgerald's show every day for a week, and she's going to sit in the front row. The media, people, the audiences, it was just completely burst open. Ella Fitzgerald never ever sung in a small club ever again after that. So Marilyn Monroe did something right there. What she thought about is, trust me, There's something that you can do for someone else. It might be, Marlon thinks I can take my stardom and give it to Ella. Or there's always something you can do, whether it be mentorship, there's always something that you can do, and always know that. The last point or two I'm going to make is, to empower each other, you have to change your behaviour and daily habits one day at a time. Be conscious what you say, but also be conscious what you don't say when you see sexist comments. And also it's like what my mum would say to me, mind your language, which is, there's words that are being used around when you're supportive of women. They might say, you're a feminist, as if it's a negative word. I think just declutter the mind of words like feminist. What you're saying is you're anti-sexist. What you're saying is you believe in equality. There's no such thing as feminism. It's believing in equality. You're either sexist or you're not sexist. You're racist or you're not racist. Just be clear on the terminology and language being used. So I think fundamentally, men and women working together on this is really important. Some people unconsciously say sexist remarks. With my nephew and niece, you mentioned your nephew and niece, Priscilla, and I noticed when I speak to my nephew, I say, you're so strong and you're so smart and you're so fast. When I speak to my niece, I'm saying, you look so beautiful, that's a really pretty dress. And then actually stand back and think, what have I just actually enforced and said? So it's not that sexist comments are meant to be harmful from people, but when they happen, when you and when you hear them, think about them and change. When you hear them, make the change and be the change. So thank you very much. I'm very positive about the future of energy, despite everything that's going on. There's been a lot of progress being made for women, but there's lots of progress to be made. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Sean, we come to you. Really keen to hear from your perspective on the talent and the people side, on how you would respond to how women can reposition themselves for the energy future.
Well, thank you so much. As a quick introduction, thank you so much to my esteemed panel, for ULP, for hosting me tonight. And as Priscilla said, a very empty-seated audience, but hi to you all out there. My name is Sean Ture, and I'm going to speak from a perspective of talent management, focusing around the gender equality as well as diversity and inclusion within large corporates as well as the statistics out there in the world. So diversity and inclusion is underpinned by culture and change in every single organization. And that's almost seen as a must-have. But is it a real business necessity? And, that's what people always talk about over the table. Is it business policy that we refer to? Or is it a deliverable that we're aiming for? So once business understands the need for this particular change itself and deem it as a financial goal at the end of the day, will we only see the realization of empowering and uplifting all diversity within the organizations themselves. So when I talk about diversity, it's not only gender-based at the end of the day, it's speaking to the minorities as well, those with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different races, as well as the minorities that exist in our world. And I'll give you a quick example as well. So a few experts say that the gender pay gap will only be reached in 2058. And apart from that, they reviewed the statistic and it's been pushed even further to 2118. And that's almost 100 years from now. And this is not even due to any sort of epidemic happening from a global perspective or not. It's real, it's happening, and unfortunately, it's affecting a lot of creative people out there as well. And when we look at diversity, people talk about how creative teams can actually be a bit more productive. More diverse teams are highly productive and lead to more financial profitability for companies than those with less diverse teams. And my sort of problem with those particular statements is that why do we actually have to justify diverse teams along the lines of profitability, along the lines of productivity itself? Does that need to exist just to ensure that companies need to be diverse at the end of the day? And that's the language, or what I would say, that's the golden thread of communication. And if leaders can understand, empathize, and really deal with these issues at hand, therefore you will build a true diverse force at the end of the day that's not aligned to just your policies. So those sort of policies that would, obviously look at how many women do we have in leading positions, in board positions, in managerial positions. We call that vanity stats at the end of the day, because those are just statistics. And the real work at the end of the day is how do we turn those statistics into real life business wins, into real life business cases, and be real about it, because we are dealing with people at the end of the day. All of that is underpinned with, stereotypes that exist, particularly from a traditional model in terms of the old boys club. We're talking about unconscious bias. When people talk about interviewing, and when we go through a selection of individuals to look at senior roles within the organization, there's a panel of men discussing, should they look at this candidate or that candidate? We need to diversify those panels. We need to break unconscious bias of affinity, of natural affinity. And we do that at the end of the day through culture change management, through education, through knowledge sharing, and through collaboration with one another as well. And I'm very excited to say that, I work for two amazing CEOs, one global CEO, one Africa CEO. And, they are well-spirited, they are energetic, they are driven, and even better, they're both female. And at the end of the day, the amount of change that they've brought into the organization, the passion that they deliver, has really done amazing things for the organization, particularly breaking down legacy barriers. And that's what we aim for at the end of the day as well. So although we are moving in the right steps, we're not moving quick enough. And a lot of companies are going through these particular processes. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion and gender inequality, that transcends from sector to sector, not only focusing on the energy sector itself. That transcends from geography to geography as well. It's not a nationalized problem. It's an actual global problem at the end of the day. If we think back, and I think of two big adverts in my life, whereby it has outshone a lot of rights. And one of those adverts, I wish I could show it to you, was a racetrack, a corporate racetrack. So you have two runners, one female, one male, and they're running a corporate race. The female has to get through her family, has to get through her kids, has to get through looking after everybody. And the male's track is open, and he can just run and run and run. And it's absolutely impactful at the end of the day to state that, it's an equal race when it's actually not. And we as men have to step up to the table and do our part at the end of the day, and to, embrace what Claire has mentioned, be that particular change that we want to see as well. And that leads me into, an advert that Gillette did about a year and a half, 2 years back. The slogan is "a best a man can get," and they've actually changed that to "a best a man can be." And in that advert, they speak about the gender equality, and they show you about how men need to be that change factor. Stop harassing women, stop harassing small boys. And the key take out of that is that our boys of today will be the men of tomorrow. And we need to show them what's the right path as well, so that we can accomplish these goals together, both on a professional basis and a personal basis as well. So we need to break stereotypes, and we need to do it together and collaboratively as possible. And for the future and the fit for the future itself, there's always the element of learning, of upskilling, of looking at this ever-changing market. The fourth industrial revolution is here. People are talking all about that. And the COVID crisis has really embarked us onto a brand new path, which is unknown relatively. And what we need to do at the end of the day, collectively, as both male and female, is to embrace the changes together. Upskill, learn to brand ourselves, look for opportunities both from a mentorship perspective, as well as from a a lateral perspective as well. So we learn by growing sideways and we learn by growing upwards. And at the end of the day, what I would like to say is that be that particular change and understand that there's a direction that we all need to head for. And I think we can do this if we all have a mutual change idea in plan. And that's what I would like to talk about or stipulate about within the current topic of today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Priscilla, I'm not sure if you want to come in. I do want to notice to say we've got over 300 people online on YouTube and on Facebook. Please send in your comments. Please send in your inputs. I do need to let you know we're going to be challenged. Some of the questions I've already seen are going to be quite challenging. I'd like to just kick off. If Priscilla, do you want to make some comments? Yes, if I can just kick off. It would be remiss for me as a young black woman sitting here not to challenge some of the inputs that we've seen and heard. And I like this concept of unconscious bias. And if I can start with Kwezi. Kwezi, you speak about money and investment flows shifting and changes in global demand and the power sector being more robust than the hydrocarbon sector. The need to invest in R&D and new energy technologies. But if we just take the concept of unconscious bias, who owns those monies and those flows and those assets? And what can be done to ensure that in this changing power and energy market, women can access and be part of those money flows and those new investment opportunities? I'll start with you.
Okay, I must say, asking me to describe the situation as it is not a challenge. I'm just replicating fact. We started by talking about male domination as an inherent factor that we are dealing with now. And therefore, we must accept that a lot of the decisions being made about the monies, the investment flows, and all of that will be made in male-dominated boardrooms. That is a fact. And that's the very reason we're talking about women's empowerment, is because we recognize the fact that we are dealing with an inherently unequal situation. However, so the next leap you make, which should not be a victim leap, of saying then, because the situation is the way it is, then there is no possibility to change it, not all of it at the same time. I'm one of those people who always say one of the biggest challenges we have is that sometimes we look for that one big change, that sometimes we forget the importance of the small victories. So the ones you are able to chip away at, you do. However, you need to make sure that inside those big corporations, you then have the people who are fighting for the big changes as well. Whether it's the corporations or the policies of governments and all of that. That's the first thing. The second one, which is a related issue, I think today is probably mostly professional women we're talking to, but I'm going to combine it with those who want to run businesses, is the issue as to how do those monies flow and who then becomes the active participant on the other side of it. So how do you make sure that you influence the financial systems to start to have a bias to encouraging more women to take up those opportunities and actually finance women we spoke about learning. Learning is not cheap. So to finance women to actually train themselves for that transition. So those are the things that you can start to influence. And the third one for me, I'll talk about this because it's a personal experience, and I'm not talking about in abstract terms. So I happen to work with very strong and capable women in the energy sector. And one of the biggest challenges I see for myself is to make sure that the space for them to realize who they are in that sector is not closed. Because I see it all the time, whether among the people I would work with, whether it's in society, there will be a default assumption that me as the male is the one who has it. It is my job, not in a patronizing way, to allow the women to actually show their own capabilities and not to be shadowed, because then that builds the confidence for the next generation. And so there is a responsibility that comes with that to make sure that you start to make that influence. And the more you then have people being in this field that is seen to be technical, complex, and all of that, and you see more women being there playing a role, and you've allowed that, you've not allowed, but you've actually supported that process, you then play your part to changing that dynamic. And I'll just close with a very small anecdote. I was thinking about it before I came. And it's not linked to money only. So if you grow up in a rural area like me, it's the women who, and in the era I'm in, when I grew up early, where electricity was not something we had, it's the women who had the burden of making sure that there was energy in that rural village. Whether it's in the home, the community, fetching firewood, doing all of that. And so it was easy for the men to trust that the women will make sure that there's energy in the village. You then move into a corporate sector where suddenly men decide that energy has become complex for women. Because you are doing that because also you want to replicate the form of oppression of women. Even in the rural setting, it's more about the women doing the work and the men not doing it. But still, they understood energy. So therefore, part of what you need to do is to challenge the logic that people try and advance and make this thing look like it is not something that women can do. And I think it is part of what you can do to chip away at the edges, but also influence at the center where you can.
Sean, you spoke about unconscious bias, and I think we were all a bit shocked at your gender pay gap date. I mean, most of us will be dead. Most of the people on the line will be dead. I mean, to project a gender pay gap closing by 2118?
2118, yes.
By 2118, a century from now,
Correct.
implies that the constraints to seeing women's equal or equitable participation in the workplace are so entrenched that it's going to take 100 years to break them down. So if you can just give us some clarity on, in light of the fact that we know that women's work is as equal as male work, why would it take 100 years to close this gap?
So when the experts actually came to these figures, the factors that they looked at is, number one, the underrepresentation of females within the leadership positions, particularly on board level. And they also looked at, the driving factors behind greener energy, and that women who actually spearheaded more greener energy as well were well more accomplished and will be moving towards that particular sector. And the guys spoke a bit about fossil fuel and how fossil fuel will be still in our sort of environments for the next few coming years as well. And that had a major play on that, because at the end of the day, a lot of the male leaders in the organizations were tending to go towards fossil fuel routes itself. And those were the factors that they looked at in terms of implementing an estimated date on this. But if you break it down even further on the unconscious bias side as well, it's, where they're ingrained with certain aspects of keeping it an all-boys club, of, not allowing and advocating diversity in an environment and not promoting the diversity for the correct reasons itself. Some of the aspects on it where, let's just train people, train the opposite gender, and they'll be happy at the end of the day. When we all know that, women are more likely gifted from an intelligence perspective, did much better in classes than their male counterparts. But when they move into the corporate environment, their shift isn't as aggressive as enough. And that's due to stereotypes, that's due to traditional thinking. And the ways that we need to break down those barriers are not going to happen overnight as well. There's a lot of threads that need to be woven to ensure a good communication plan, a good culture plan in there. And it needs to be authentic at the end of the day. This is not just a sensitive subject just for the sake of it as well. It needs to be heartfelt, it needs to be empathetic, and it needs to be rolled out at all levels within an organization itself. And the trend of shifting within an organization does take a lot of time as well. So I would lead to those particular factors really impacting that particular date. But at the end of the day, things change. And, as the environment changes, as people change, as people become more aware, I think you can get that gap down as quick as possible. And we can only do it, as I mentioned, from a collaborative perspective as well.
I'm going to ask one question, then I'm going to go to the questions that have come in from online. So you speak about partnerships, relationships, collaborations, and new energy systems. And what I'd like to know is, how does that look like, different from today, with women inside of them? So what needs to happen for women to be able to be represented in the current ways that the market is shifting, business models are shifting, because the existing players who set the terms, who are the norm, are currently reorganizing the entire industry around the existing power structures and existing dominant structure. How would that look?
Certainly. The point there was around the future energy system is it cannot be funded unless it comes from different parts of society. Whether it's government will play a role, consumer tax will play a role, organisations will play a role, because no one can go it alone. The numbers are too big, and also energy has also been like a spider in the web with the rest of the economy. What happens influences energy, and it's going through a change. So, as I said, the energy system's going to change and diversify. So when there's change, there's more opportunities. But practically, how do women get more involved? And it's interesting you mention, well, women go renewables, men go fossil fuels. I don't think it's going to work like that. I think the key concept here is there's no such thing as what is a male job and what is a female job. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it's like, it's almost like, even in the French language, you have female nouns and male nouns. Even our words are male or female. So when there's significant change, you tend to find that women progress faster in jumps and speeds. So for example, during World War I and World War II, men's job, go and fight in the trenches, in the air, in the sea, off you go. Which means that in factories, it means that bus drivers, male jobs at those times were taken by women. So it was a big change that women can have these jobs. Nowadays, of course, we have women on oil platforms out at sea. Women can drive trucks. You know, that type of thing. So the opportunity is there. There should be no labelling of this a female sector, a male sector, or even a job. And if we can get past that in our minds, everyone, male and female, it's all about your skill and about your access. There's no such thing as men having certain skills better than women and vice versa. It's not true. So I think it's about getting rid of male and female stereotypes.
Okay.
Maybe just to add as well to what Claire is saying, and I really support the views. I think there is also a realization that we also need to recognize that the diversification that has been discussed provides new opportunities for us to be able to be innovative, to be curious, and to find solutions in areas where men might not be thinking of. And we have that capability. You look at the STEM subjects, how females are doing in terms of university and high schools. So how do we then encourage that female talent pool to be more innovative and to start thinking about, as the value chain is starting to be broadened, how can I play a significant role in terms of that and influence that going forward? As technologies and the need for new technology is required, how do we encourage females to be more innovative, to be able to unlock that? And that takes both sponsorship internally in organizations, but also self-drive as well. So I think it's important for those who are with us in this room and on the line is to understand that it's actually a dual partnership, and it can only be successful if we both invest in it appropriately.
We've got some comments coming in. I must say they're all directed towards, at this point, Standard Bank. But let's say they're directed towards Kwezi, so you don't have to answer on behalf of your bank. The first question, Kwezi, from Mahlogonolo, is Standard Bank ready, or at least having internal conversations on how to relax its funding criteria post-COVID in order to fund infrastructure projects in energy? For example, building and managing storage tanks facilities by women-owned companies. Do you want all the Standard Bank questions?
I'm just going to talk in a general finance answer. I think it's probably better that we broaden the questions as well. I will answer the question this way. I don't necessarily think on the specific question around those infrastructure type investments Matlono is talking about, you necessarily need a relaxation or not. To me, I don't necessarily think that addresses the question. And actually, this is what I see as the challenge. Based on the interactions I've had on this topic, and we've had a lot of interactions, including hosting a conference on it last year, what I've come to realize, and I'll just use this as an example, and this may not talk to the person who asked the question. I found a lot of people who work in the sector and they've worked in corporations. And let's say I worked for a large corporation and I was a technical person who understood my work, and I go and become an entrepreneur myself. What I found people sometimes forget, and sometimes a very small thing, is that when you are in a corporation and you want something and it needs to be done, it goes through to a finance department and they then arrange this, they come and talk to the bank, they come back and they come back to you. When you are now out on your own, you are the finance department. If you go back to the skills we spoke about, either you have a partner, partners or a partner, or you learn the skills on how to deal with a financial institution. So part of what I lay back as a challenge opportunity is that in the process, and well, from what Priscilla said, there's also the responsibility, the entrepreneur or the person interested. What do I need to know when I move into this world of this type of investment, which is not, and I can say that not a lot, because not a lot of investments have been done in that sector in South Africa recently. And therefore, I found that to be a challenge. The second one is that we have a lot of good ideas, but for them to be financed, they need to get to a certain level of readiness. Now, that requires us to make people understand what gets comfort to be able to finance something. But also, if you go back to the resource question, actually, one of the then biggest challenge is how do you get resources to enable to support people to get ready for projects to get to that level? And if you go back to collaboration, there's a limitation to what commercial banks can do in that. And this is where we challenge partnerships that may occur either with public sector, with the development finance institutions. How do we collectively support entrepreneurs to get to that point? And therefore, when you then have got a certain readiness on a project, it becomes less about how you relax a condition, but more about the things that you can facilitate to get a project to be signed off. Because you've built the instruments for it to be successful. And actually, we value the ability, we value being able to have a conversation with people about what makes things work. So it's possible that there may be a specific condition that can be negotiated when you are doing this financing process. However, there are certain general principles that you need to make sure you have at least ticked off to allow any person to be comfortable to hand depositors' money, I must add, onto a project. So therefore, I think it's the getting the projects to states of readiness that I've found to be the biggest challenge than actually financing the projects themselves. And the last point is, and I've always, I get paid when I give out money. So it is not in my interest not to give out money. But it is also not in my interest to give out money when I am not convinced that it is ready to be given out for that specific. And so that's where the collaboration comes in. Yeah.
Another point comes up here, and I'm going to relate it to Sean's point on vanity statistics, right? So one of the questions here is whether or not there are specific women's funding vehicles. So we might be getting into a chicken and egg discussion here, because one of the things we're raising is there needs to be self-drive, but there also needs to be sponsorship and access. And the three areas of finance we've picked up is finance to train women for transition, finance for women to participate in R&D for new technologies, and finance for readiness for bankability. And so if we step out of vanity stats and the politics of representation, how are we going to deal with these particular gaps that are enablers for women's participation in the energy transition? I'm going to throw this out to everybody. Person can pick up their mic. Maurice, you can also comment if you want to.
Crazy, are you? Okay,
I'll come after you. No, I can start with this
I'm
question.
just putting my mic on. Okay, it's
I'll
on.
start with, I'll come after you.
Okay. I think, Tato, it's a valid point that you're raising, but I'm going to probably get into trouble for this one. I find myself struggling with women-exclusive programs. I believe that, and despite being a mother of girls, I do believe in an integrated society. I think the challenges we need to ask ourselves is, what are the limitations with respect to the current platforms that we have, which earlier on, Sean, you spoke about biases in terms of systems that we are using. But equally so, how do we then address those in a systematic way? How do we make sure that when Priscilla, who's sitting on a Standard Bank board, is actually making the right representation and asking the right questions, and to assist some of the male colleagues, should they have biases in terms of that? Because I'm equally worried about a society that is exclusive, because I do believe that diversity brings a lot of wealth and growth for both men and women. So how do we then ensure that we address those? So there are lots of platforms that I know lots of companies are creating to enable and unlock access. But I think the challenge is not about funding for women, it's how do women access that? And probably, Kwezi, that's what you can then address to say from a Standard Bank perspective, how do we make sure that our modelings, our biases in terms of our engagements and the support that we give, for example, are actually geared towards addressing what we're looking for. Someone said to me, when a man walks into a boardroom, he's assumed to know everything. When a woman comes in and you're assertive to talk to a banker, you're then being challenged on being aggressive. And this just comes naturally because of our biases. So how do we make sure that we can unlock value for those who want to participate in that space?
I'll just pick up on something that was said before, and I think I may not have overemphasized its importance. When you then go to an institution and it has got a diverse team, the potential for you to be heard, I don't care from which background you come from, the potential is just much higher, because that diversity will force that team to self-correct. So therefore, getting organizations and even financial institutions to be diverse is actually a critical issue, because then the people who have to make decisions, if they are diverse, they allow themselves to self-correct in a collective conversation. That's actually vitally important. So if I go back to the question that maybe was asked also before, you may then, if you are going to a place that is not diverse, was it a lending condition that got me not to get the money, or was it because I just did not look like the person who must get the money? And therefore, you are no longer dealing with the actual content of the project. Now you are dealing with other things that are about prejudice. And therefore, when we present not just a face, but a real face that is diverse, is part of what we are doing is giving confidence to the society we service that we are going to look like you such that you will be heard. At least that is at a basic level. On the other hand, what I've found is that most organizations, most large institutions in particular, they get the training thing relatively okay. I say relatively because it depends on what organization. So organizations will find it easy, let's go and train, let's have bursaries, let's do that. And lots of women being sponsored on that. And you tend to find the training side tends to be the one that people can do, and maybe it's because points can be also obtained and you can give a report and all of that. Which is when you start to do the hard parts, which are about projects or opportunities, where a real creative process is required. Now, if I go back to the collaborative question, the bank will finance a project because it exists in a certain environment. It may be ignited by a regulation or by a company looking for a service and all of that. The extent to which the company that may be looking for that service outside, that may be then supporting a project like the one that was spoken of, how do they provide the support that makes it easy that when you look at the whole ecosystem, risks are manageable across all angles and all parties, and then you are able to then hand over the money. So, and not that this is the only one that women should look at, but I just use this as an example that is prevalent in the petroleum industry. So, there may be not necessarily be funding for women, let's say to do, let's say, distribution stations or retail stations. But nothing stops the sponsors from the companies to then say, we want to have a bias to having more women being supported to get that. So by the time this portfolio of opportunities come to a bank, the bank can't self-select because actually the sponsors have created that bias. So it can only come from the bank, that's all I'm saying. The bank itself can respond to support that process, but it's collaborative in a sense. That is important. Even though there may not necessarily be specific women type funding, but if an institution is interested in diversity and change and transformation, when it sees opportunities that are driven by women, it should then support them in accordance with that objective. Of course, it doesn't mean that you stop looking at all the financial metrics, because that remains important. And I think for me, that is what is possible. And as a last point, going back to partnership, is about the fact that, and this is what we are also learning, I would say, not say we are good at, is the fact that once people come with projects, how do we get them to find other partners to do other things for on the project to make it easy for it to progress? Because sometimes people may think all they need is a loan from a bank, but actually, no. You needed something else. You needed a network of technology partners. You needed something else. How do we use what we know to allow them to choose the ones that will make their projects progress? And it's not just about the money, it's about the institutional knowledge we've built up that allows us to share that with those people who are trying to progress. And I think it's in those fields where I'm finding that we are able to make movement.
A very provocative question. I think this is for you, Ishan. From a classmate of mine, actually, in the MMEL program, Maurice Butimelo. She says, 100 years is a long time to close the pay gap. At the end of the day, women don't pay less for bread or rent or their bond than their male counterparts just because they're women. We pay the same. So should there be a salary increase freeze for male counterparts so women can catch up?
Well, Boitumelo, that's quite a tough one, because that, in another turn, is another prejudice coming in play as well, in terms of performance bias as well. But we do understand that the actual foundation is shifting in terms of what's been happening from a pay grade perspective for inequality, and some companies are actually trying to meet that curve as well, in terms of not just giving out salary increases just for the sake of gender equality itself, but basing it purely from a performance perspective. And relaying to that would in itself take time to get those increments as well. And it's not to say that women would get higher increments out of the reason of gender equality. It should be out of merit as well, of that same note. So it is, in fact, very difficult to comment on that, other than saying that these factors are looked at from a global perspective as well. And if we fine-tune it from an Africa perspective, it's even more diversified than that. You know, you can't pick on a single contribution factor of unfair pay, unfair work in that particular regard, because we've got laws and regulations that work towards equal pay, equal work at the same time. But the past discriminated against that in that particular sense. And therefore, the drivers of that are coming to fruition. I'm not sure at what pace it will come, but the journeys have started. And with that, it's a bit unfair to say with patience will show time, but that's all I can say around that particular subject itself. One of the things that you look at, or that companies look at from a talent perspective, is that when you do actually look at employing people, and if they are behind the pay gap of a relative internal benchmark, be it male or female, I mean, you come to the party to ensure consistency. And you look at external benchmarking as well when you do these data quantitative exercises. And the merit in that is that we try to equalize it on that particular note as well, irrelevant of gender. Because at the end of the day, the job is not specific to a male or female. It's specific to the skill set that they bring into the organization itself. And when it comes to the actual job requirements in terms of inherent skill, as Priscilla mentioned, females will be aggressive in that particular nature or labeled to be that, while men would be more assertive in that particular regard. It's not a job requirement at the end of the day and shouldn't be ventured and measured against those particular criteria in terms of personality traits as well. So with that being said, people like myself in positions in companies actually look towards these mechanisms to ensure consistency, transparency, and fairness on that particular subject matter.
Particularly like your point about equalizing salaries, because that begins to deal with the gender pay gap, especially if recruitment processes want to set salaries at existing salaries, which already have that historical bias and unconscious bias already factored into the salary. I'm reminded by a story that Claire often tells about when she's in a salary negotiation. I remember you said this last time, Claire. You said you always ask, what is my male counterpart paid? That's what I want, right? So the pay gap, the equal pay for equal work is a really, I think, challenging idea in a context where we use words such as performance and experience relative to what's the work that's actually being done at the end of the day. So I just want to land that because it's coming up quite strongly. I have another point here from Soraya. She's saying we talk about the change we want to see, about being the change we want to see, but how can we be the change we want to see before we are in executive roles? As a young, ambitious woman with a belief in work-life integration, this belief in itself is holding us back as females. So how can we maintain being a woman while preparing ourselves for the future as a professional in the energy industry, which can be demanding?
So I'll quickly say something on that. We don't have to be in an executive position or a management position to be a leader in anything we do. So, I would really call for her to really exercise her leadership attributes and skill set in where she is at this current stage in life, from a personal and a professional capacity perspective. And with that will come a lot more opportunities where she can further expand it, grow it, develop it, as well as share it with others as well. I would also recommend to try and get internal mentorship happening in the organization that she's working in to prepare for the movement as well. And you have to be the sort of driver of your career at any given day. You wouldn't get a company who's going to say, you're doing so well, let me just quickly promote you. No. It's you have to knock on those doors as well. So there's an equal opportunity that exists from a personal perspective for this individual to move forth at a very respectful and aggressive pace as well.
Claire, you're a lot in the policy making, the strategy space. You influence decision makers in the public and the private environment. And what do you see from a pro-woman perspective in the policy making space and in the decision making space? Are they enough women making those decisions, developing those policies, and can you see that reflected in the decisions and policies that are coming out?
So generally speaking, the people that are making policy and strategy decisions are more at the executive level. And at the executive level, there's less women. So, I'm just visualizing a picture of Donald Trump for some reason, when I think it was something around, can women have an abortion or not? You know, a big sensitive topic in the US. Every single one of those that were making a decision about women's bodies were men. I would love a forum where women made decisions about men's bodies, but really the executive level, it's mostly men that are making policy decisions, and you can see it in everyday life. I recently had an update to my kitchen on building work, and the cupboards are too high because only men can reach them. So in everyday decisions, reaching cupboards, reaching policy and strategy, there will be a bias according to the people that are making it. And I hope you don't mind, I want to touch on the previous subject which was made around vanity stats, which I think is a great phrase. And that is, it's not that men or women are not being paid the same for doing the same job. It's proportionally because there's less women at a higher level. So the average means that, there's a gender pay gap. So really what it means is getting women into a higher level. And getting women into a higher level, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of pressure on women in really high-end female positions. And I've certainly found in my experience, the higher you go, the more sexism you will feel. Mm-hmm. Not when access point is difficult, middle is okay, and when you go higher, you see it and you feel it more. So I think at the same time, don't expect a female leader to always help you and bring you up the ladder. Also be conscious that you need to help her, because it can be pretty lonely out there. So yeah, I think it comes to that. So in the strategy and policy space, it's changing, but the more we get it in those positions, the better those strategies and policies will be.
I mean, maybe Claire, to add as well, I find as well that governments and corporates are more and more mindful of policies. But then we struggle with implementation as well. So, and this is where the courage for us as females to speak up. And because I do recognize, and I was there as a young, driven woman, and I make assumptions in my head at times. If I go to Maurice to talk to him about this, he will think about me this way. So how do we support, mentor, coach each other to also just take a risk? What do we have to lose at times? You might lose your job, you might be labeled, but you are equally unhappy in where you are. So I think we have to focus a lot on empowering, encouraging women to take a stand and to challenge, and also just to take out these small noises and voices in our heads.
Do you mind if I add to that? Which is, I think it's a fascinating topic. So, I mean, it's really interesting what you said, because it's, women think a lot about, they have confidence issues, and I don't know how it happens, but they have a lot of issues around being confident in what they're saying. How does Maurice perceive you if you ask this question? How does men perceive me? How does someone perceive me? And I think women are definitely trained more to think about how they appear socially, because we talk about women's appearance all the time, it would seem. So I think when you get to a stage as a woman where you think this really doesn't matter, when you move from being inward looking, how do I appear, and actually then get to the stage, I don't care. I'm really just going to be who I am. Am I supposed to dress this way? Am I supposed to have long hair? What am I supposed to do in order to fit in? We talk about diversity, but the real part is belonging. Now, belonging doesn't mean to say that you wear the same uniform. So if you're a woman, it's just like put that stuff to bed immediately and just think, it doesn't matter what people think about me. It's really, really none of my business, actually. But I must be who I want to be. And I think it's the women that do that that matter. I just want to add this kind of random part story to emphasize that point. So I think one of the most amazing women I've seen is someone from this country, is Caster Semenya. Caster Semenya, great sporting achievements, very fast, great runner, great achievement. And guess what? She's such a good runner, she couldn't possibly be a woman. She must be a man because she's so good at what she does. Right? And look at her. Is she female or is she male? What is it? And then all this policy comes out around, is she male or female? Very invasive. And now if you look at someone like Michael Phelps, an amazing American swimmer, gold medals. And I don't know if you know, but Michael Phelps has unusual DNA, an unusual body structure. He has elongated feet and hands, and he can process oxygen completely different. But no one's going to go, he is so good and won all those gold medals because he's basically a dolphin. You know, it's like, let's go and do a dolphin test on him because, you know, so what I'm saying is I think it's don't think about what yourself is, just go out there and be whoever you are. Even if you're Caster Semenya, even if you're pushing boundaries in people's vision in terms of, you know, male, female, dolphin, whatever. Be a dolphin if you want to be a dolphin.
Conscious of the time, we've got 10 minutes till closer, and so I want to just share some of the comments that we're getting from online. Not all of them are questions. One is, we have now all seen society, industry, government simultaneously adapting to change on a global scale. It's the perfect time to use this momentum to drive change everywhere else. The second comment from Nkululeko Zondo is, unless we have a majority of men like Kwezi, then we will see more traction on closing the gender gap. Else, you will still face an issue of black men even being misrepresented. So which should take precedence? Very interesting question. Black women or black men or women or men? There's some specific comments here about R&D and around how organizations are contributing to changing the status quo in our society on research and knowledge from this perspective of gender. And I think we will take that just as a round robin, because I think we didn't touch very well on this, the R&D space. So we often speak about professionals, employees, entrepreneurs, not really researchers, but students, people in the public and the private sector. But we haven't really touched on the fact that there's a real opportunity in the R&D space for positioning of women. And to get a sense from you and your different organizations, what are you doing with research to contribute to research and knowledge creation and the contribution in South Africa from a gender perspective? It might not be from a gender perspective.
Actually, the answer might look like a cop-out, but it's how, if you observe research and how things happen globally. The only institutions that have got the capability for real long planning of research and resourcing for that are public institutions. And then they can partner the private sector. Those are the ones who are really set up for it. And I read a book recently by an economist, Mariana Mazzucato, on the entrepreneurial state. And she describes there how we always think about the iPhone as an innovation. But she then traces how the different parts that make it happen were all publicly funded. What the private organization did was to connect the different technologies into the whole that is now the iPhone with some additional things. So that is the first thing. I think what we should collectively fight for is a leading role by the public sector in sponsoring lead research for society. And then the second part then is how do then the other organizations complement that effort themselves in terms of what they do. But remember, the public research is public in nature, and the organizational research is just for their own technologies. So not everybody will be able to access it. That's the point I wanted to make there. Because funding of it becomes critical. And then you go back to our earlier conversation about how do you then make sure that the women who come through the STEM field are promoted and given access for this research, not just to do the research, but to, if you look at some of the leading edge countries, sponsored to go to the best institutions in the world for postdoctoral research, those types of things, because they become the leading edge leaders of the future in that field. And this is where the companies also play the role then, because sometimes the public sector is not going to have all of those resources. And I think, to me, if you are able to interplay, and then the third component is having the incubation organizations where people are then able to apply that research and do all of that, which are the collaborative instruments. And I think, for me, once we move into that direction, then I think we've hit the right spot.
I think from an R&D perspective, women have always played a role and made an impactful contribution in research and development. It's just that you don't know about them. So, you know, the first computer, a female typed out and coded, and it was her coding that did that. So it's just that over time that the communication of who actually did something tends to be the more senior person, and that senior person tends to be more male. So women have always contributed to R&D. You just don't hear their names, or you don't hear about it because the person at the top takes the credit. So I would say that from an R&D perspective, it's continue on, but hopefully getting some recognition for that. Obviously, there's a lot of space for R&D, whether it's be different technologies and energy and so forth. In fact, there's about 20 people in the world that have been selected on SpaceX with Elon Musk to go to Mars. One of those is female from South Africa. So women have always been there, they just haven't been recognised for it. And I think that's a combination of more women in senior roles, the recognition of women, the role they've had to play, and the confidence of women to talk about it.
I do share the same echoes as well coming in from the colleagues. I mean, number one, yes, they've played an instrumental role in R&D, and corporates need to play their part as well, all the way from a STEM perspective, and focusing and deploying their efforts to ensure that there are ample opportunities within the environment, as well as ample opportunities external to their environment as well, be it from education programs, incubation programs, as well as mastering mentorship sessions as well. So I think companies need to continue what they need to continue as well. And I feel that the direction from here onwards is particularly going to go up. There's a lot of investment from corporates into development, into research, as well as, from what I've seen, into more diversifying their gender population as well. But I think the bigger gaps are once that foundation level is actually saturated, the movement upwards from there becomes the issue itself. And I think, if you look at the R&D, they're heavily inundated with more interns, more graduates coming to the organizations, and therefore the liftoff is much harder once you digest into the organization itself. So structurally, there's a problem with that. And we've talked about it across the various aspects on the diversity issues, the bias issues itself. So I think corporates, as well as people, need to really rework how they do business and how they work together from that perspective.
We've reached the end, so I'm going to ask you, Maurice, if you can just come up and give some of your closing remarks, and then we'll be able to wrap up the session.
Thank you very much. I will show that I do have my mask. Can I take it down? I'll take my hat off also. Well, I think they deserve a round of applause for all the great work, the whole panelists. It's amazing. And you also, members that are remotely, you can give them a round of applause. Let me also just apologize. Theo has indicated to me that we had a little bit of some connectivity challenges, but they're now all sorted out, and We really apologize, and we will make sure that in future we continuously improve in this space. I think this is ULP is committed to excellence. Let me first thank Priscilla for leading this transformation process. When I, some few years, was it last year or a year back?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, and I said, look, it's time for me now to hand over the transformation baton to her, and she's taken it with a great enthusiasm and great gusto, and this is why we've got these women in energy think tanks, and then I think she deserves a round of applause for that.
Thanks.
And recently she also handed over now my job to her. So it's this is continuing this transformation agenda. I'm actually at a space where I can, there's a biblical character called Simeon. I can now go and rest in retirement in peace because I have seen the green shoots of transformation in our industry. And why I'm so happy about this is that we've been struggling for 3 decades to get transformation in terms of gender in this sector. And I am really pleased that in the last 2 weeks, 5 women were appointed. I want to make this point right here, particularly as we are online, so that many people can note it. And I'm going to mention their name. Miss Priscilla Mabelane was appointed EVP Energy Business at Sasol, which means it looks after the entire energy business of Sasol. And then we're very proud of that appointment. You can count on our support, Priscilla. Okay. And then Ms. Taelo Mujapilo as the Chief Executive Officer of BP Southern Africa. So, you know, I like this because, you know, in the struggle when we grew up is that when you've conquered the terrain, you must protect it, and you must make sure that you don't lose the terrain and the transformation is not reversed. And we've seen it, reverse of transformation happening in the couple of years before. And I think that's very good work that Priscilla, you've made, that your successor also is a woman. And not just because she's a woman, but because she's capable, because she's competent, because she's extremely wise, and this is very important. And then Miss Nelisiwe Makubane, whom I know very well, she was a DG of the Department of Mineral and Energy for a very long time, and now is Mineral and Resources and Energy. But she's appointed the Chair of Strategic Fuel Fund, which is a critical organization in our energy space because it makes sure that we've got the strategic stock, and this is a great strategic appointment. And the 4th one is Ms. Zanele Sibisi, Chief Operating Officer, appointed to be the Chief Operating Officer of African Exploration, Mining and Finance Corporation. We've been talking about money here. So you must go to Zanele and see the Finance Corporation and mining in particular. Great appointment. And then Dr. Pindile Masangane, Chief Executive Officer for Petroleum Agency of South Africa. 5 women in 2 weeks. There's a huge transformation process that is taking our country. So I'm extremely happy and I'm extremely excited. And we congratulate these leaders. And I can assure you that you can count on ULP's support. And in fact, because of this appointment, these appointments, we are having our annual conference in August that is for women in energy. And we will definitely ensure that we invite these ladies to come and share their experiences and answer some of the questions that you have grappled with. Can I just also make a comment before I move on? Sean, you know there's things called scenarios. You've painted the worst scenario and you said 100 years. And as a leader, I know that we determine the future. And you choose the worst scenarios and you choose the middle of the road and you choose the good. I don't want to accept that scenario. I just don't accept it. I don't believe. It's correct because of the assumptions made, but I don't accept it. And I don't want any person to believe that scenario. We have to change that. I remember when we were young, we used to have freedom in our lifetime, and we dreamt about that. We never thought it was going to happen, and it did happen in our lifetime. And I'm sure the pay gap is going to change in my lifetime. Do you believe that?
Yes.
That's what I believe. It has to change.
Yeah.
Huh? It can't be 100 years. Priscilla, do you agree on that?
I fully agree.
No, we can't accept that. Huh? Claire? No. I want your voice.
We're very soft, yeah.
I just can't accept it because I want to correct it in public because you see, once you say something in public, it gets into the minds of people, they accept it, and it just manifests. So we have to change it in public. So, sorry, Sean, I'm not attacking you. I just felt very strongly about this one. We have to change it. We have to change it. So I was saying we will in August we're definitely going to have this conference here, and if we're on lockdown 1, we'll have it full. But if we're not on lockdown, not yet ready, we will have it online. So be ready. No, our administrator will be sending you the exact date. I also want to comment about what's happening in the whole world for Africans in diaspora and the brutal killing and murdering of George Floyd. I do want to say, as ULP, particularly in my capacity as a chairperson of ULP, that we condemn this kind of racism, and we also condemn all forms of racism, all forms of discrimination, all forms of prejudice, and all forms of bigotry. And I just want to place that on record. And as ULP, and I encourage all ULP members and mentees to do whatever they can in their area of influence to remove this demon of racism in every aspect of our lives. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the panelists. Claire, thank you very much. Let's give her a round of applause. And Tato, wonderful work of facilitating. I think you've got some talent here, which you need to nurture.
Yeah, definitely.
You never know, it will take you far. Oprah didn't know where this talent took her. Now it has made a big... Sean, well done. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the great work that you've done. Let's give you a round of give him a round of applause. You see, I'm giving you and crazy, hey, you've been facing a lot of Standard Bank. You see, once there's a man with money, I've been in DLP. Once we get a guy with money, he gets all the questions. So wonderful work that you're doing there. So Standard Bank, we're looking forward to see Standard Bank making bold decision around pay gaps, about targets. I like the word you use, vanity stats. I've learned this is a new technology, new terminology. But I want to also thank the whole team that is here, the administrators, the technology team, the digital team, and everyone who's made this a success. And I'd really like to thank you. And we will continue these kind of sessions under the leadership of Priscilla on a quarterly basis, and making sure that everyone online please participate and engage. I think this thing is being filmed right now, and Theo will make sure that you get access to the recording, especially if you miss those parts that when we had connectivity problem. So thank you very much. God bless you.